This video is about my initial thoughts on D&D Next, or 5th edition, and the playtest material currently available. After watching Samwise7 RPG's video on D&D Next, I decided that I'd finally sign up for the playtest myself. Now, having only just bought the core books for Pathfinder and really enjoying them, I thought, well, D&D Next is going to have to be something pretty special for me to consider eventually shelling out all that money again on yet another set of core books. I've already been burnt that way once with 4th edition. However, I decided to read it, thinking that there might be elements I could incorporate or take into my proposed Nordic game, and because it seemed like a good idea to at least give it a chance. I won't be going into too much rule-specific detail in this video since I don't want to break any non-disclosure agreements or anything like that. The playtest material I downloaded, which as of recording this video is the 2nd of the 8th 2013 version. It comes in a number of sections containing a fillable character sheet, backgrounds, bestiary, character creation, classes, DM guidelines, feats, how to play, magic items, races, spells and equipment. There's also an adventure called Murder in Baldur's Gate with some pre-gen characters. One thing I noticed straight away is that the new character sheet looks very graphically interesting, and I believe, according to the written update in there, that it was the winner of a competition. It contains most of the things I would expect to see on a D&D character sheet. However, I did notice there's no place for skills to be written down. More on that later in this review. Skills would appear to have been replaced with attribute roles, which I think some people may have a problem with, although as a Fate Accelerated player, first and foremost, I'm absolutely fine with this. In the background and lore set piece, there seems to be more emphasis than perhaps previously placed on background traits. Since this is one of the elements I've been a big fan of in Iron Heroes, I'm all for this. Fields of Lore is a fancy title for areas of knowledge, and basically what that means is you make a stat check when you're trying to recall a specific area of knowledge, and you receive a bonus if you've got that area of knowledge ticked on your character sheet, i.e. you possess a background in that amount of knowledge. These seem to be chosen based on your character's upbringing or background, and Fields of Lore can be gained by taking certain feats, if you choose to use the feat system. Again, more on that later. The sample backgrounds offer some very interesting ideas, providing a couple of bonus traits and aspects to certain Fields of Lore, and some starting equipment. I can see how this will be easy to expand and could be tailored for specific campaigns. I expect if the line proves popular as it goes on, there'll be numerous additional backgrounds and traits brought out in further books. The monsters in the sample bestiary cover a fairly wide spectrum containing all of the traditional favourites that you would expect to see, the goblin, the zombie, etc. However, the ecology details aren't present in the sample, presumably they'll be added later in the final version of the book. The stats look fairly much as I'd expect, and it covers the standard attacks and abilities of the creatures. However, some of these stats and abilities do remind me a little bit of the monster stat blocks and the at-will powers in 4th edition. I'm hoping that later material will show how these abilities were arrived at in some manner, so the GM can customize or tweak monsters without having to make as much arbitrary guesswork as I sometimes felt was the case in 4th edition. The character generation section will be pretty familiar to people. It's written clearly and concisely with some good little snippets of advice for people to think about whilst creating a character. The class section at the moment only contains the barbarian, the cleric, the druid, fighter, mage, monk, paladin, ranger and rogue. The bard is notable in its absence, although the written update does say that that'll be included in future material. This section contains the standard list of level-based attack bonuses and benefits, hit dice, etc. There are included a list of armour, weapon and other proficiencies, such as riding, which seems to harken back a bit to the older AD&D days of weapon and non-weapon proficiencies in my mind, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, to be honest. Weapon proficiencies would seem to give you a class-based additional bonus to attack when you use the appropriate weapon, although I'm not sure what impact the other proficiencies have on play, since there doesn't actually seem to be a skill system used in the game. Now, I did search through the files, but couldn't find any further details of what these other / non-weapon proficiencies give you. This may be because it's not yet been included in the sample material, or that it's still in flux. Please bear in mind that this is only the beta testing phase. I look forward to seeing what, if anything, they do with that later on. This section also introduces a number of abilities that give you the advantage. Now, this is a mechanic that means when you have the advantage, instead of rolling a single d20 for a challenge, you roll 2 d20s and you pick the highest. Now, I quite like the idea of this, and I can see it working quite well in play. There seems to be a greater emphasis in customization on character classes presented in the game. Each has multiple paths that contain different options for character development. As a DM who likes to allow player characters to be unique, and encourages players to make the characters that they want to play rather than be overly restricted by too many rules. I think any amount of allowed customization in a game has to be applauded, although I suspect there is a danger of this becoming bloated and overblown, with additional options being added in numerous source books afterwards. This certainly was one of the downsides of 4th edition in my eyes. The spellcasting classes will appear to have access to the standard Vancian magic spells, which is only to be expected, and I don't mind. I expect it in D&D, although personally I prefer a spell point system, and expect, should I choose to use D&D Next, that I'll be customizing or house ruling this. There are a few abilities which seem to take inspiration from the healing surges of D&D 4th edition. For example, the fighter has a second wind ability, where as an action he can regain half his hit points. Once this is done, he has to take a long rest again before he can recover and use that benefit again. Now, I'm not sure how fond I was of healing surges in D&D 4th edition. I can see the upsides and the downsides of them. The benefit obviously being that it means your characters continue adventuring for longer without having to rest all the time. And the clerics tended not to be relegated to the levels of a magical heal bolt. But it was never a concept I felt particularly worked within the game, and I'm hoping that this will be addressed later on in the material. The GM advice section is extremely well written and contains useful advice about when to use and not to use the dice, the most common methods of resolving conflict, setting challenge DCs, and other such things. There's a very interesting section which discusses using dice rolls for interaction or social scenes, which is a bit of a thorny topic that's caused debate amongst role players for as far back as I can remember. The book addresses the most common approaches, and it provides guidelines for each. This seems like a more than reasonable compromise as far as I'm concerned. The section also contains some detailed notes on dungeons and random encounters. Now, personally, I'm not really a fan of the standard dungeon crawl, but the advice seems comprehensive, and if you like that sort of thing in your game and enjoy it, I'm sure you'll get a lot of use out of that. There's also some advice for building encounters, and this would seem to be based around the idea that you have 3 classes of encounter: easy, average, or tough. At each level, the GM picks what level of encounter they want, and they receive a number of XP which can be spent on monsters or elements in the encounter. This seems like a great easy way to create balanced encounters, and some information is given on monster treasure as well. If I remember correctly, this sort of encounter was used in AD&D 2nd edition, but it's been a while since I played AD&D, so don't quote me on that. Feats in this system are presented as an optional subsystem, which I quite like since I'm a fan of modular design, and in this instance they can be taken instead of a stat increase where indicated on a class advancement scheme. Now, one thing I will say is the feats listed in the sample material seem to me to be far more powerful than the traditional feats from 3rd ed or 3.5. This is presumably because they are balanced against the potential benefits of gaining an ability score increase, since in this system you will be picking one or the other when you have the option, rather than receiving both feats and ability score increases. In terms of the rules, attack rolls work fairly similar to 3.5 and Pathfinder. Saving throws are now strictly classified as ability rolls rather than being kept separate on the character sheets. I quite like this, since I never really saw the point in having them written separately, given that they were derived from stat scores in previous editions anyway. There's a further discussion of the advantage-disadvantage mechanics, where you roll 2d20 and you take either the higher or the lower result, depending on if you have the advantage or the disadvantage. This is an element I quite like, and I can see it being quite interesting in play, since it isn't as hard line as a plus or a minus modifier. However, as it says in the title, it does give you a significant advantage or disadvantage. I quite like the sound of this element, and it seems eminently nickable for use in other games. Most of the combat seems fairly familiar in this system to hit rolls of 1 automatically miss, and rolls of natural 20 automatically hit and score critical damage. In 5th Ed or D&D Next, scoring critical hit means that you take one of the damage dice of the attack and you roll it again, adding the second result as an additional damage bonus. If the attack has multiple different damage dice, then you choose which one to roll again, presumably the highest one if you're planning on killing your foe. Whilst I'm not sure how much more deadly this would or would not make crits, the system seems workable. Dying through loss of hit points is handled slightly differently, with people making death saves to hang on to life once they hit 0 hit points. And there's numerous other little bits and pieces about death from massive damage and instant death, most of which will be treading familiar ground for anyone familiar with 3rd Ed or 3.5 or Pathfinder. Spells all look familiar, with the exception that cantrips can now be cast at will and do not require a spell slot. This is a great rule as far as I'm concerned, and means that mages always have a few little tricks up their sleeve, even if they've used the majority of their spells. Now, this is an element of the setting I really like, since when in a fantasy setting, generally, do you come across a wizard, unless it's the bumbling or naive apprentice archetype, where a wizard uses all his magic and then basically goes, I can't do anything. So I like the fact that in this new version, wizards will always have at least a few little tricks up their sleeve. Certain spells can also be cast as rituals, which is basically they have a slightly different effect, they take much longer to cast, and they require a precious item, a ritual focus, to be used in the casting. However, it means that they don't expend a spell slot. Now, I particularly like this idea, since it seems like it would reward a level of preparation on the player's part. If you know you're going to need a certain spell, you can take that extra time, cast it as a ritual, and still hold all your other spells back in case any unexpected circumstances present themselves. I think rituals could also be used to simulate a lower magic game by placing restrictions on non-ritual casting. This is a possibility I might consider for my own campaign, and I believe rituals, certainly the terminology of rituals, was used in 4th edition. I don't have a massive amount of experience with playing 4th edition, so I can't comment on whether the rules are similar. I believe rituals were kept as a separate subsystem of the magic system in 4th edition, whereas in 5th edition, D&D Next, the basic spells have a ritual version of them, or a slightly amended description if they're cast as a ritual. The magic item section didn't particularly inspire me, to be honest, although it's more of an equipment list style chapter, and it was perfectly well written. I did like the idea of there being a limited amount of items that a person could attune themselves to, though. This harkened back to me to the D&D magic ring problem, where you can only wear, I believe it was 2 magic rings, 1 on each hand. If you wore any more, the rest would simply stop working. One thing that seemed to be missing in this section was magic item creation rules, although I suspect they may follow later. Hopefully they'll have done away with the idea that making magic items costs you XP. I've never really liked the idea that by practicing your craft you somehow mystically become less proficient at it as you go along. After all, if that was the case, why the hell would anyone bother ever making any magic items? The races section provides details on the standard D&D 3.5 Pathfinder races, listing their cultural details, ability score modifiers, and racial abilities. All of this stuff will be pretty familiar to 3.5 and Pathfinder fans. One thing they do include that I like is for each race you pick a sub-race. For example, dwarves have hill dwarves and mountain dwarves. These sub-races provide a bit of extra customization for your characters, which, as I've said before, I'm a big fan of, and I think their inclusion is a really good thing. The only thing that doesn't really sit well for me in this chapter is that the humans get +1 to each of their ability scores. This sounds quite overpowered to me, although it's the only real advantage they do get, so it may balance out by the numerous abilities other races get. I have to see it a bit more in play to be sure. It also seems a little bit odd to power up the humans so much when I've always assumed previously that humans were the baseline that other races deviate from. Although I suppose since in this new edition, since races don't appear to have negative stat modifiers anymore, only positive and additional abilities, perhaps this is no longer the case. The spell list is pretty much what you'd expect, as is the equipment in this chapter. So, overall, I think the playtest material looks pretty promising. It certainly has enough of a 3.5 Pathfinder flavour that I'd be willing to give it a go, but that I'm interested to find out where it's going to go in the future. There are a few aspects that I have reservations about, as I mentioned earlier, but it seems to be nowhere near as divorced from the original idea of the D&D game as 4th edition. Now, I know a lot of people bash 4th edition, and whilst personally I consider it more of a skirmish level miniatures game that has only superficial links, besides the name, to D&D, there were some very interesting elements in the game, and if you liked the miniature skirmish element of it, more power to you. I can see where the new edition has taken some inspirations from various elements of the 4th edition game, and why not? You have to learn from the things you did right as well as the things you did wrong. Overall, my final verdict on the D&D Next playtest material will be that it's promising and interesting. Watch this space.